one occasion in my life, and I hasten to add it's one occasion. Fortunately, since then, I've found the mechanisms to cope and not allow myself to get back to that level again. But on one occasion, I came perilously close to taking my own life. Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to the A Load of Bull podcast with me, Paul Bull. Before we move forward with today's issue or topic, I just want to say I'm very sorry that I haven't recorded for a while. Sod's law, I guess you call it, but literally a few weeks after I launched my new YouTube channel, launched the new podcast channel, I actually lost my voice. So as you can hear, I'm a lot better now. I'm back in the frame. I want to give a special mention to my speech therapist, Belen, who has worked wonders. So thank you very much, Belen. I'm really, really grateful. Right, let's move on with today's topic, and it's certainly relevant. As we all know, we have been through one hell of a terrible time over the last year with the COVID pandemic, and there have been many issues talked about in relation to that. Of course, there are huge numbers of deaths, huge numbers of people catching the virus, and wider implications. What I intend to do today, I'm going to focus on one particular area, and it's an area which I have a certain amount of personal experience of, and that's mental health, the impact of COVID on mental health, and particularly depression. Anybody that knows me will be aware that I have suffered with depression at various stages during my life. Basically started around about my mid to late 20s. I don't know whether there was a particular trigger, but needless to say, it's something which I've lived with on and off ever since. And it's something that I'm not afraid to talk about. And the reason why I say I'm not afraid to talk about it, is because I want to help reduce the stigma attached to depression. Now, with a lot of illnesses that you can see, or injuries, people understand them, or they think they understand them because they can see the effects. But with depression, it's different. It's a hidden illness. And for that reason, people don't tend or haven't tended to understand it quite as well as more obvious conditions. For that reason, there's often quite a lot of ignorance, misinformation, and a lot of question marks raised over illnesses such as depression. So by talking openly about it, as I do, and as I know a lot of other people have started doing as well, it helps reduce the stigma, because what it effectively does is it normalizes it as an illness. People look at mental health separately. Okay, yes, it is separate to a physical illness, but mental health illnesses are illnesses, and they should be treated accordingly. So, what we're going to do today, I'm going to look at depression and the effects of COVID on the mental health of people around the world. So let's start. And it comes as no surprise that with the onset of COVID, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of cases of mental health issues and depression. Issues associated with the global pandemic, clearly bereavement. So many people have lost loved ones, people close to them. And of course, bereavement is the natural aftermath of losing somebody that you care about. Quite often when people are bereaved, they suffer with associated issues such as depression, understandably. And of course, because we've been in the midst of this global pandemic, we've seen huge numbers of people lose their lives. Clearly, you've got an increase in the amount of people who are going through bereavement. Other issues associated with COVID which have an impact on mental health, of course, are things like isolation. So during the lockdowns or the quarantines, as we call them, um, many people have either been forced to stay in a very confined space with their families or loved ones, or they've been alone and they've not been able to socialise at all. So, of course, with that comes a sense of isolation or a sense of being trapped, entrapment. Maybe you don't want to spend 24/7 with the people with whom you're residing. Okay. At the same time, people can feel very lonely. I know that people can communicate via the telephone, through the internet, Skype, Zoom, etc. Okay, but clearly it's not the same as physical, presential, face-to-face contact, and so that, the isolation, entrapment, if that's what we want to call it, of the lockdown and quarantine periods, they're something which you have to take into consideration as well. Other issues, of course, relate to people's financial situations and their employment. Now, clearly, with COVID having such a great impact on the world, so many people have either lost their jobs or have been forced onto a reduced wage. This in turn puts a greater impact on the household in terms of the payment of bills, etc. More and more people have been getting into debt, which of course also has an impact. So, loss of income, loss of employment, or reduced income, reduced hours, clearly that's going to have a big effect. If you're under pressure, particularly if you've got to support a family, if you see your income reduced drastically or you've lost your job, then clearly that's something very serious to contend with, and clearly that's going to have an impact on people's health. Of course, the other one as well is fear. Pandemics don't come around very often, okay? And COVID effectively came out of nowhere. Okay, I don't want to get into all the conspiracy theories, etc., but a year and a half ago, the world as a whole wasn't expecting a global pandemic. Okay, so when it happened, there's a lot of uncertainty. There still is. People didn't know what was happening. People weren't familiar with the pandemic, the implications, how it came about, the effects that it actually has on a person's health. So having seen now the amount of people who've caught the virus, and also the severity of some of those, or a large number of those, and also the deaths of large or huge numbers of people around the world, clearly that's going to create fear. So fear is something which obviously has an impact mentally, and it's another factor that we have to take into consideration. Now, of course, many people deal with those feelings in different ways. Now, fortunately, we have a bit more movement, so people can go out and exercise. But, at the worst times of the pandemic, people were trapped at home, and it was difficult. If you live in a small space, it's difficult to do physical exercise. So, the impact of not being able to get out, even just to get some fresh air and stretch your legs a little bit, people couldn't turn to exercise as a way of helping offset mental health issues. I'll come on to that later because, for me, as somebody who suffered with depression, exercise has always been a fundamental part of combating the condition. Other more negative ways of dealing with it are things such as alcohol. People like a drink, okay, and in moderation, of course, that's fine. I enjoy a drink. I like a pint, like a glass of wine. Nothing wrong with it as long as you do it in moderation. But when people are under stress or people are starting to feel down, certain people will turn to alcohol as a sort of crutch. They use it to prop them up, which is obviously very bad because alcohol itself is a depressant. And the same thing goes in some circumstances for the use of drugs, whether they be prescription drugs, so the overuse of prescription drugs, or whether it be illegal drugs. a dependence or an increased level of dependence on alcohol and drug use is obviously negative. Okay, everything in moderation. All right, I know illegal drugs are illegal, so that's a whole other debate for another time. But an increase in the dependence on those substances is obviously a negative effect of trying to deal mentally with some of the issues that I've mentioned. Other things as well. I mean, clearly, I mentioned stress before. Anxiety and stress. They're often linked together. The anxiety, I suppose, you could link that with the fear as well. Anxiety, not the uncertainty of not knowing what's happening or how to deal with something. People are feeling overwhelmed and not knowing what to do. And obviously that can create anxiety. Insomnia. Now, I know this is like a random one out of nowhere, but insomnia, people have found that their sleep patterns have been disrupted. Sleep is fundamental, just like exercise, in offsetting conditions such as depression. If you're not sleeping the required amount of hours, so you're either oversleeping or you're not sleeping enough, then that's going to have an effect on you as well, because it's very important to get the right amount of sleep. Of course, you can't do that every day. It'd be amazing if everybody were able to get 8 hours sleep, the recommended amount per day. It doesn't happen, okay? But, at least try and get some sort of normality into your sleeping patterns. Of course, when you're at home all the time, or when your hours have changed at work because of the situation, then your body clock changes as well, and that can have an impact on you both physically and mentally. So, how do you cope with depression? How do you keep the black dog, as Winston Churchill famously called it, at bay? Well, it's something I have quite a lot of experience of. As I said before, I began to suffer with depression in my mid to late 20s. Not sure if there was a specific trigger, but it did happen at a time when I was under a lot of stress. I changed jobs, various other things which I won't go into. But I just noticed that one day I wasn't just feeling sad, I actually had a sense of helplessness. I was feeling much, much lower than usual. So it's difficult to explain, but I knew that something wasn't right. And as the days progressed, I felt myself almost spiraling further and further down. People around me, strangely enough, actually noticed the change in my character, in my behaviour, and the fact that I was sort of withdrawing, as somebody who's always been very social, to suddenly go into myself and withdraw was obviously something which people close to me noticed. And eventually I realised, I got to a stage where I one particular day I just burst into tears. Everything just got too much for me. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor diagnosed me with depression. And that was that. And basically from there, it's been a big learning process, whether it be through exercise, whether it be through counselling, psychology, medication. There are lots of different ways in which you can combat depression. But the first, most important step that you take is admitting to yourself that there's a problem. Now, what happens? You've admitted you've got that problem. Maybe you're getting some help. I mean, that's the first thing I would say. If you're feeling really, really down, do go and get professional help. Okay. I must point out, as you're probably aware, I'm not a medical professional. However, I'm just speaking to you based on my own experiences. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few bits of tips, I suppose, of how you can combat depression, or at least how you can cope with it if you're unfortunate enough to go through a bout, as I have done on several occasions. Depression affects people in many different ways and on many different levels. Quite often there are triggers for it, but on other occasions it may be just down to a simple imbalance of chemicals in the brain. Certainly some of the things that I've done, when I start to feel, I have to say, in recent times I've been fine. more or less. But there are certain aspects or certain feelings that you get that warn you that I've got to watch this. I'm going to monitor how I'm feeling, but I'm going to take the steps that I know work or have worked to stop me going further down. And I'll give you a few of these pointers now. Like I said, I'm not a medical professional. If you are feeling that you might be suffering with depression, or if people are worried about you, please do seek professional help. It's very, very important. Anyway, looking at some of the pointers, and this actually comes from an article that I wrote going back a few years now. As I've said, I've never been afraid of talking about depression because I'm very keen to reduce the stigma and encourage people who are suffering with the illness to come forward. Don't be afraid. So, like I said, professional help is the most important thing if you are feeling that way. But there are pointers that you may find helpful. They've certainly helped me, and we'll begin with the first one. The first one, as I've said to you before or earlier, is be honest with yourself and accept your condition. It's nothing to feel embarrassed about. It's an illness. It's a condition. Okay, you might have feelings of hopelessness, anxiety, emptiness, loss of interest in hobbies or work, lethargy, fatigue. There are lots of different symptoms. I could go on a bit and list a huge number of them, but like I say, it affects different people in different ways. But the most important thing is being honest with yourself, admitting that you aren't feeling well, admitting that you've got a problem, and taking the steps that you need to deal with it. Point number 2, like I said, don't feel ashamed. It's nothing to be ashamed about. Okay, it's an illness, and it should be treated just like any other illness. If other people are empathetic, then they will understand. Okay, and besides the fact, the focus is on you. The focus is on you and seeing how you can make yourself feel better. You might need some help to do that, but focus on getting better, not on what other people are thinking. Number 3, tell people around you. Don't suffer in silence. It's very, very easy to go into yourself, shut yourself off. I mean, I remember the first big episode I had of depression. I spent a long periods of time sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall with a telly on in the background and nothing really going through my mind. It was a very dark and disconcerting time. And I didn't really want to tell my parents or close family members and even close friends because at the time, I didn't really understand what was happening, and maybe there was an element of feeling embarrassed. Obviously, I've said don't feel embarrassed. You have to overcome those feelings. It's nothing to feel embarrassed about. But the important thing is tell people around you. All right, don't isolate yourself. Seek professional help is the 4th point I've put. I've mentioned that various times earlier in the podcast, and that goes without saying. One thing I must say, if you're feeling really, really low, and I mean to the point where you're thinking of, maybe even ending it all, okay, you really, really do need professional help, and you need to speak to somebody urgently. Now, I'm saying that from experience as well. On one occasion in my life, and I hasten to add, it's one occasion. Fortunately, since then, I've found the mechanisms to cope and not allow myself to get back to that level again. But on one occasion, I came perilously close to taking my own life. And clearly, I'm delighted and relieved that I didn't. I managed to muster the inner strength, and there were various factors going around in my head that prevented me doing it. But I came very, very close, and it's essential that if you get to that point, if you can prevent yourself doing it, obviously that's great. But some people don't have the capacity or the willpower to do that. They wave the white flag and that's that. If you feel that you're getting to that point, please speak to somebody. It's very important. And I just want to give a plug to a wonderful organisation which is very close to my heart. They're called the Samaritans. I'm sure if you're in the UK, you've heard of them. I spent hours on the phone when I was at my lowest point, speaking to volunteers, brilliant volunteers from the Samaritans, and they helped me through, just speaking to an independent person on the end of the phone, they helped me through a really, really, really dark and difficult time in my life. You know, I will be forever grateful to that organisation. There is a hotline number that you can call. There are other ways of communication. I'll put the details at the bottom. I'm pointing, obviously this is the video version, the podcast version, I'll put it in the description. But yeah, the Samaritans are a wonderful organisation. So, you know, if you're feeling very, very low, as well as seeking professional help from your doctor or a specialist, you know, do call the Samaritans. If you need that bit of independent support, motivation, reach out to them. That's what they're there for, and they're absolutely brilliant. The next point on my list, don't let the prejudice and ignorance of others delay your recovery. Now, I've talked about this earlier. You know, don't feel ashamed about things. That you will possibly encounter people who are ignorant about your condition. Okay, admittedly, more and more people understand depression now and other mental health issues. People are more aware of them. But certainly, in my time, I've encountered people either at work or in my private life whose ignorance and lack of understanding has possibly been counterproductive. I'm being diplomatic there. It might be somebody in a work environment, for example, you know, a person who isn't familiar with the symptoms of depression, isn't familiar with the implications, and they might just dismiss it. Now, being dismissive about something as serious as that is irresponsible, to say the least. I have encountered that. Okay, I'm not going to mention any names, I'm not going to mention any times, but I have encountered that in a working environment. I have encountered it in a personal environment as well, but you know, I think in your private life, because you surround yourself with people that you know you want to spend time with, even at those times when you're trying to isolate yourself, the people that love and care about you still want to be around you. So, you know, they try and be more understanding, but, you know, don't let the prejudice of other people and their ignorance delay your recovery. Focus on what you need to do and don't worry what other people are thinking. That's an important point to make. While we're on that point, I also have to say that in a work environment and in my private life, I've also encountered some amazing people who have been incredibly understanding, incredibly empathetic and sympathetic to the condition, and have helped me no end. I've encountered prejudice on one side, but I've also encountered some incredible acts of humility and empathy. So, you know, like I said, the important thing is focus on your recovery. Do sport, stay physically active. Healthy mind, healthy body, the two interact. A good friend of mine, Clive Farron, he is an ex-professional boxer, runs a boxing gym. He's also a psychotherapist, and he's written a book called New Mind, New Body. Okay, and he always talks about the tools that you need to deal with life in general, but also things like depression and mental health issues. And one of those tools is exercise. He got me in the boxing gym, working out with him on the pads when I was going through a bad bout of depression quite a few years ago, and it helped me no end. Getting into that routine going in the gym, sweating it out, letting a bit of aggression out, a bit of stress. It really helps. And of course, if you're feeling physically better about yourself, then that's going to help you mentally as well. So, do sport, stay physically active. You might not be able to go and do boxing, or you might not want to, but at least get out, go for a walk, get some fresh air, within your own limitations. I mean, obviously you put limitations on yourself a lot of the time, but within what you feel you're capable of doing. But stay active, very important. Try relaxation techniques. Now, this can be difficult. I mean, if you're really depressed and you're going through a really, really difficult time, relaxation techniques can be difficult. Some of the basic ones that psychologists teach you and therapists teach you, like the breathing exercises, the slow, deep breathing, controlled breathing. I mean, they're great. They do help. So, obviously have a look at those. If you're feeling really down, though, if you're really depressed and you're really in the depths of it, it can be difficult to focus on anything else. So, things like meditation might not be possible for you. However, if you feel that you are able to do it, I can recommend meditation. I have done it at various points throughout my life, and I have found that it helps. Find a nice quiet place or somewhere you feel comfortable, and just try and switch off. It's not easy to do, but it gets easier with practice. So, meditation, I'd certainly recommend it. And of course, there are many other relaxation techniques. The 8th point I've made on my list, try and get the right amount of sleep. Now, I said this before, sleep is essential. It's like exercise. You need to get the right amount of sleep. Depending on your age, there's a certain amount of time that they recommend that you should have every day. Now, I'm sure that very few people are able to get the recommended amount of hours every single night. But at least try and get yourself into a pattern where you're going to bed at a good time and you're getting up at a decent time. Get into that routine. It's very, very easy to fall into bad habits of going to bed extremely late and then staying in bed late. Okay, your body clock adjusts, and then when you try and get back, it makes it even more difficult. So, particularly in light of COVID, like I said, people's body clocks are all over the place because of the different times and routines that people have had to adopt, as well as the restrictions, or adapt to. So, trying to get the right amount of sleep is fundamental. Do it as best you can. I'm not going to say you're not going to sleep 8 hours every night, I'm sure. But don't oversleep and try not to get too little sleep. Eat healthily and don't drink too much alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. Clearly, in moderation, it's not too bad. But if you're suffering with an illness like depression, alcohol is a depressant, and it's going to obviously make the situation worse. Not only that, but if you're on medication, the reaction that alcohol can have with the medication can also be dangerous in some cases, but certainly it can create unpleasant side effects. And eat healthily, okay? It's easy to fall into things like binge eating the wrong stuff. Maybe you don't feel like preparing a meal. So, you get a takeaway, or, you eat something unhealthy. And if you fall into that habit, then obviously it's going to be counterproductive as well, because you're going to, gain weight. You're not going to feel good about yourself, and that's just going to add to the problem. All right. At the same time, other people, when they're feeling low, they lose their appetite. So, the opposite of that is not eating enough. And if you're not eating enough, you get thin, you get weaker, and again, that's another negative effect. So you need to strike a balance. Make sure you're getting the right amount of calories, or a good amount of calories down you, a good mixed diet. The 10th point, stick to a routine, or develop and stick to a routine. Okay, it's important more than ever to get some discipline into your life. So don't stay in bed all day, because that will have a negative adverse effect. If you can force yourself to get up at more or less the same time, go to bed at a decent time, but also do things within the day. I mean, they don't have to be big things, but just getting up, like I say, at the same time every day, allocating a particular time slot to do some exercise, even if it's just doing the washing or the washing up at a certain time, planning it into your day. That schedule will actually give you some organisation and discipline in your life, and it will actually help. Okay. Again, it depends on how serious and to what level you're suffering with depression. It's easier if you're not suffering on such a profound level. But start off with little things and build it into a more fixed routine. 11. This might not be for everybody, but therapists have certainly recommended it to me, and I find it helps. I mean, being a journalist and writer myself, as well as a teacher, writing your thoughts down. Now, you don't have to show these to anybody. You don't have to tell the whole world about them, but write your thoughts down. You can write them down on a piece of paper. It's like getting it out. Some people go to the gym and work it out. Some people write them down and get it out that way. Okay, so write your thoughts down. I mean, I've in the past thrown myself into writing articles. Some of them I've published on my blog, and I've found that to be very therapeutic. And obviously, trying to help other people can be very therapeutic as well. But writing your thoughts down, piece of paper or on a computer, write them down. Nobody has to see them, but it's just your way of expressing and getting it out of your system. Don't be a hermit. Again, this comes back to isolating. With COVID, it's been very difficult because a lot of people have been isolated. They've been stuck in isolation, quarantine, lockdown, etc. So they haven't had a choice, and that in itself has been counterproductive. But when you do have an opportunity to socialise or be with people, don't be a hermit. It might seem like you have to make the biggest effort in the world to get out there and see somebody. But even if it's just meeting a friend for a cup of tea or a coffee, just that in itself can make a big difference. As part of a routine during the day. Do things at your own pace, of course. Don't force things. Don't put yourself in situations where you're going to feel obviously uncomfortable, because then you'll feel disappointed and that you've let yourself down. So don't set yourself up for feeling even worse. Do things at your own pace, but build up. But make sure that you're not a hermit. Do keep in touch with people. It's really, really, really crucial. Talk. Okay, again, goes with don't being the advice not to be a hermit. Okay, talk to other people. Now, if you can't do that face to face in a presential form, then do it on the telephone. Have a Skype call, but talk, communicate. Even if it's just a case of phoning somebody up, or if somebody phones you, answering the phone, just say, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay, thanks. How are you?" Try and ask them about their life. Get involved with them. Try and get yourself out of yourself. So talking and communication, fundamental. All right. And also, and this is the sort of final point that I made. Remember that you're not alone. Okay, I mean, there are millions of people around the world who suffer with depression and other associated conditions such as anxiety and stress. There's obviously still a long way to go, but more and more people are finding it easier to talk about it. Okay, they're finding it easier to come forward and ask for the help that they need. And things like I'm doing now, the whole point of me talking about it so openly on my own experiences is because I want people to look at this and think, well, if he can express himself, then I can express myself. I can ask for help. I can talk openly about it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be afraid to talk about it. It's an illness, okay? And remember, you're not alone. There are so many people around the world in the same situation. You know, you can recover. Believe me, I know. You can recover and you can go on and lead a very fulfilling life. Okay. Now, you know, depression might not go away forever. With some people it does. They have a bout, it goes away, and they never suffer with depression again. Other people, myself included, you know, I've had various bouts of depression, and you know, you can go for periods where you feel absolutely fine, and then all of a sudden, bang. Okay. But with experience, you know, you come to learn to recognize the signals, and you know how to deal with them at an earlier point in time to stop yourself spiraling downwards. Okay. Anyway, I hope that you found all of that helpful and supportive. It's very, very difficult, as I've said, with COVID, very challenging, very emotive, difficult times. And as a result, conditions such as depression and other mental health conditions have increased. With that in mind, you know, if you know somebody that's going through a hard time, you know, keep in touch with them. Do keep an eye on them. If you feel that you need to, contact the authorities. You know, contact a medical professional to get advice. Okay, if you're really worried about somebody, you know, don't just ignore it. It's important to act on it. If you are feeling down and you are on the path to getting help, you know, I wish you well. I really do wish you well with your recovery. Of course, if you want to make contact, if there are any comments you want to post, etc., you know, I'd be happy to, you know, delighted to respond to them. So, you know, remember, you're not alone. Please stay safe, everybody. Okay, and take care. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, listening. Take care. Bye.